Hi everyone, my name's Catherine Barrow, and today I thought I'd talk a little bit about some really important ideas when it comes to your own startup. So at Pixel Fusion, we work with a lot of startups at different stages, different levels of funding, and one of the things that we find time and time again is that people tend to forget how important it is to consider not just the desirability of your ideas, so not just whether people are actually going to want the product that you're creating, but whether it's viable and whether it's feasible as well. So what I thought I'd talk about today was just a little bit more detail on those three different factors and what makes the sort of combination of all three of those really critical to the success of your startup. So the one that everybody always focuses on at the beginning is desirability. And so what we mean by desirability is this something that people are actually going to want to use? So is it solving a problem, a real problem that people actually have? And if it is it in a format and in a product that people are actually going to want to interact with on a day-to-day basis? And a lot of startups start there because that's where the idea comes from, right? That's when you have that sort of aha moment and you're like, wow, okay, cool. I can really solve this problem that I'm experiencing or my friend or my family is experiencing or that I've just seen in the world. And so that's where that initial idea really comes from. And the problem that we see quite often is that people assume that if they can validate that this is a problem that people actually have and it's a product that people actually would like to use, then that's it. They've got a really successful startup on their hands. And so the real problem is when you forget about the other two factors. So you forget about feasibility, which is this actually technically possible? Can I make it happen? And you forget about viability, which is this sustainable? Is it going to be profitable? Is it defensible? Is somebody else going to jump in and eat my lunch at the last minute? So starting with desirability, what we often look at is something like a design sprint. So we might use a design sprint to assess whether you've identified the right problem, whether you've identified the people who are actually experiencing that problem, and whether you've solved it in a way that people want. And so design sprints are great for answering those questions because we spend a lot of time going out and validating those ideas with real users and getting real feedback. The second part of that, though, is then looking at the feasibility. And this is where design sprints often just don't work right. So what you might find when you go and do a design sprint is that you spend all 5 days figuring out whether it's desirable, and you don't answer those really, really critical questions. Things like, does the technology actually exist for me to be able to do this? So for example, if you have a really great solution for, I don't know, getting to Mars, right? You think you've come up with a really great idea for this. Have you actually validated that the technology exists? Are there going to be hidden, unknown questions that you're not quite sure how to solve or that we just don't physically have solutions to yet? The second part of it is also thinking about, okay, we might have the technology, but is it accessible? Can I actually get that technology? Is there a good supply of people out there who actually have those skills and are going to be accessible to me to help me solve this problem? Because that comes into feasibility as well. And so what we'd like to do is, as part of our design sprints, actually identify those areas where technical feasibility is a question and do things like building proof of concepts. So a proof of concept is great. You don't need to spend a lot of time to really validate whether that thing is going to be possible or not. So for example, you might build a proof of concept to see if you can integrate with a particular service, or to see if you can build something in AI or VR that is going to work the way you need it to work in order to support your solution. And then finally, one of the most important factors of all is actually the viability. So what we mean by viability is you've identified something that people want, you've identified something that solves a problem, and you've checked to see that it's actually feasible, so the technology exists. But is it something people are going to pay for? Is it something that is solving a big enough problem or an important enough problem that people are actually willing to hand over money to solve it? And have you identified a business model that surrounds that? So have you done your research into, is it going to be subscription based? Is it going to be a one-off payment? And also understanding who it is that is actually going to be paying that. So feasibility is one part of it, but viability is ultimately where it comes down to, is this a viable business? Because at the end of the day, you can solve a problem and you can build something really cool from a technological perspective, but if it's not a viable business, there's kind of no point, really. And so, yeah, I thought that would just be something really helpful to share for people who are starting out, who have maybe had that aha moment and they've thought, wow, I can really solve this problem, is don't forget about the feasibility and the viability, because it's the intersection of all of those three things that's really going to create a strong, viable, sustainable startup and ultimately a successful business.